Good evening, everyone. This is Pradeep, Ambassador of Change from GETI, the Global Education and Training Institute of Lucknow. We are the premier training institute for principals and teachers in India and several parts of the world. And we have many in-service and pre-service programs. For more information, please go to 7408401000. Right now, you are on our Disruptive Education platform. And on this platform, we have met with and engaged with more than 1,500 educators from India and all over the world. And this evening, we have for you Mr. Cyril Crasto. He's a visiting professor in Pune, Maharashtra, and he is a corporate executive from the IT industry. He has a management background with 25 years of experience. He got his doctorate in 2015. He has been an academician, entrepreneur, and a corporate executive. Earlier, he's done his computer science education and management in marketing and systems. He's into academics, administration, innovation in academic delivery, research and consultancy, team management, mentoring, interdepartmental coordination, etc. He is the co-founder of the IT services in 2009 and has clients in APAC and the Gulf regions. Uh, he is instrumental in getting various research papers published in Scopus and AVDC index journals, and also has received project funds for consultancy work. He has organized national and international conferences for research activities and also presented research papers abroad. Dr. Castro, Dr. Crasto loves to mentor students, is an active member of various associations like NASS COM, MCCIA, NENTI, etc. He is from Goa. He loves playing football. He's a foodie by nature. He loves to travel, and he buys books he can't read. So, welcome, sir. Good evening. And he will be speaking to us today on instructional design. Thank you for being with us, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Pradeep, for having me. Firstly, I'd like to thank GETI to give me this opportunity to interact with fellow academicians on a subject which I'm very passionate about. Let me share my slides. Okay, I hope the slides are visible. This is a very interesting movement. What GETI is trying to do is basically get mostly all the academicians, the ecosystem of academics into one place under the umbrella of disruptive educational movement. And as part of Detox, I'm here to engage for the next 30 minutes or so. This is a very vast topic, instructional design. Maybe a whole day is not enough, but let's try to do some justice. My name is, as said, Dr. Cyril Crasto. I'm an academician and entrepreneur also. Okay. So today we'll be talking about a few topics and subtopics on instructional design. So what is instructional design? How do we apply the different types of learning theories for education, the different instructional design models? There are a host of them. And later we'll see what are the trends in instructional design that are happening right now. Okay, before we move on, first let's understand what do we mean by an instruction, because instructional design is all about modifying the instructions to suit the participant. So what is an instruction? We've been academicians, school teachers, college professors. We know it. Let's revise our basics again. So an instruction is nothing but a plan of teaching and learning activities in which the learning process is taking place. So the aim of instruction is basically to make the learning process take place and in a very effective manner. So the whole point here is to motivate the student or the participant to learn and to learn well. Okay, so here we are trying to say that move a student from his short-term memory to long-term memory. We'll talk about that. So instruction, as per many different types of researchers and psychologists, instruction is a systematic process in which every component or every stakeholder, that is the teachers, the students, the course materials, and the learning environment, is crucial for a successful learning. This is said by Dick and Carey, who's also given us a instructional design model. We'll be talking about it. Instruction deals with teaching and learning activities. A student learns, a teacher teaches, or a professor teaches. So, to make it effective, we need to work on how the instruction is designed and planned. And a good instruction will assist the students to learn knowledge and move this knowledge from short term to long term memory. And the students will need to learn how to rehearse, how to encode, how to process and receive feedback and new knowledge if they understand these concepts well. Another definition of instruction is an effective instruction is that instruction which enables the students to acquire specific skills, knowledges, and attitudes. There are four things primarily which play an important role here. One is the planning process. We need to identify what are the general goals of the learning process and what is the student expected to learn after completing this program or this course. Then we need to plan the instructional activities based on those objectives and how are we going to achieve those objectives. Then we will develop the assessment instruments to measure the attainment of those objectives, whether the student has actually learned or has he just learned by rote. And then finally, we will modify the instruction based on the student performance, whether it needs certain improvements and things. So it's a repetitive or an iterative process. So what are we trying to do? According to a major source like Kemp, Morrison, and Ross, which says that we need to first understand the readiness level of a student, whether he's ready, does he have the basic skills to understand the concepts or the inputs that the faculty or the teacher is giving. So the readiness level of a student is important to be understood first. Then what teaching and learning methods can be most appropriate for that level of student? What media can I use? What are the resources that I can give him so that his learning becomes effective? What support beyond the teacher and the resources is needed for successful learning? How this can be measured, how the assessment can be done, and what revisions I need to do in the long term to make this learning effective. So, what is a learning experience? Instructional design always will be talking about learning experiences and improving the learning experiences. So, what is a learning experience? A learning experience is nothing but anything that the teachers in the classroom or those online courses, which we are so used to last couple of years, the instructional manuals, the PowerPoint presentations, and the simulations, the case studies, the role plays, any activity that we do which increases the knowledge of a student is called as a learning experience. And hence there is a need for instructional designers, okay, whom we call as the architects of learning experiences. So the student's learning experience can be architected or well presented by a instructional design or instructional designer. Now, this can be applied for a college or a educational setup as well as a corporate environment also. Now, there is a lot of learning required in the corporate setup also. So, we need to understand how we do this instructional design in a educational setup as well as in a corporate environment, because corporates are also using designers or instructional designers to design learning outcomes and learning objectives for their internal employee trainings. There's a concept, a very interesting concept called as the magic triangle of learning. This involves the three components which are heavily used in instructional design. One is the learning objective, the next is learning activities, and the final one is the assessments. So these three together, when they come together, we form something called as the magic triangle of learning. So a learning objective. Now, what is a learning objective? We say that a learning objective has to be achieved by the student at the end of the program, at the end of the course. So a learning objective defines and sets the boundaries of what the learners would be able to do at the end of the course. So we need to identify before the training is imparted or before the learning is imparted, what is the objective for this learning? Meaning, the student, what will he achieve, and how are we going to measure that? So, a learning objective is an important part of the overall success of the student. And the better part is that it can be measured. So, we will measure at the end of the program whether the student has literally learned something or he's just saying that he's learned it. So his assessments, like formative or summative, will be evaluated at the end of the program. So learning objective is nothing but the boundaries or what the student would be learning at the end of the course, and how are we going to measure it. Learning activities can be anything from an audio or a video or a podcast or any animation or any gamification or simulation which a faculty uses. So there are various methods or modes in which learning activities can be deployed to improve the learning experience. And finally, the learning assessments, as I said, could be a quiz or an exam or a graded simulation of real world situations. So basically, the purpose of assessment is nothing but to check that the learning objective is met. So this is the last part of the triangle, that is the learning assessment. The earlier ones being learning objectives, learning activities, and finally the learning assessments. All these three are important to form the magic triangle of learning. Now, assessment can be of two types, as we all know, formative and summative. Formative is an ongoing testing of the student's knowledge, and based on the feedback and the performance of the student, few improvements can be done in the learning methodology. Whereas the summative is once the learning or the teaching has been done, we grade him after the exam is finally conducted. So whether 8 on 10 is considered a pass or a good score, that will depend upon the learning objectives that we had set for ourselves. So let's come to what is instructional design. There are multiple definitions given by a lot of experts. The most simple one is instructional design is nothing but the design, development, and delivery of a good learning experience. Designing, development, and delivery of a good learning experience. So that's what we call as instructional design. So if you have to be really effective in imparting knowledge or skills to our participants or the students or corporate entities, we need to understand exactly how do we do this, how do we design, how do we develop, how we deliver the training experience. An instructional designer. Now, the question is, who is an instructional designer? Or, as the book says, what is an instructional designer? An instructional designer applies the systematic methodology to design and develop good content, good experiences, and other solutions to support the acquisition of new knowledge. So, the whole purpose of learning is to acquire new knowledge, and an instructional designer will help the trainer to understand what course content will suit what level of participants. So basically, we need to do a needs assessment before we start the instruction or the instructional delivery. We need to understand what is the need of the learning event. That is the needs assessment. Then what should the learner know and be able to do as a result of the learning? So we need to identify these learning objectives before we do this course, and what the learner already knows, because in a classroom or in a training auditorium, we might have people coming with various experiences, and there's a model on which there is a lot of research being done. People coming with various experiences, their learning can be a little faster than others or could be slower than others based on their intelligences or various types of intelligence that they bring. So, a learning designer or an instructional designer will use knowledge of the student's background, and which is the best platform and the best way of giving an audio or video or a role play, whatever suits best the given participant. Okay. The designer is also responsible for creating the course design and developing all the instructional materials like presentations, role plays, or case studies, or handouts, or any other materials which the faculty feels will be the best method to teach a particular student. And after this is done, the last stage will be evaluating the training to see whether the learner has actually learned and whether we can measure the behavior change after the training. Four key questions arise when we are talking about instructional design: whom to teach, what to teach, how to teach, and how to evaluate. Now, these are questions which a good instructional designer will try to resolve or try to answer before we design the instructional materials. Whom to teach, what to teach, how to teach, and how to evaluate. These are prime principal key questions that every instructional designer is faced with. The whom to teach is basically we need to understand the student's personality or his background or the characteristics of the audience whom we are training. That if the faculty understands whom is he talking to and what are the levels of understandings, what knowledge they already have and what they have come here to know, that will be a good idea. What to teach now, what instructional goals and objectives are important. Teachers must also take decisions on what the course content should be, what to teach, why are the students here, which subjects, what, how much detail do we train them on, how to teach, whether audio-visual presentation is required or a field visit is required or a case study discussion is required. How to teach, the teacher has to decide on these things. How to evaluate, formative assessments, maybe a student presentation or maybe a project report. Different types of assessments can be used. Educational measurement, assessing tools like multiple choice, short answers, true, false, etc., can also be used by the faculty to get a complete understanding of whether the training has been effective or not. Now, there are various learning theories which are applied during the learning process, and the most famous ones are three of them. Basically, one is behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism. Let's look at them in detail. Now, behaviorism is nothing but the reinforcement model, whereas cognitivism is more to do with motivation or the intellectual learning process. That is, how do we move from short-term memory to long-term memory? So these three models, and the last one is basically constructivism, wherein the participant actually takes part hands-on in completing the assignment or doing field work. So it reflects on his personal application of the knowledge being used. So we are talking about three theories of learning: behaviorism, which is used to motivate the students to learn more in detail. The second one is cognitivism, which talks about the student's motivation. How motivated is a participant or a student coming to the class? So, how do I retain his knowledge? How do I make sure that the learning experience is an effective one? So, the role of an instructor is to design meaningful experiences in the given learning environment. So, as the students participate in taking part in the student activities, with experience, they will relate to their own personal meanings to the learned information, and hence it will be easier to remember. So, it's like it's said that if you do things, you remember for a long time. If you're informed, you can forget it the next hour, probably. So, our objective is to make the learning long term learning. So behaviorism talks about the learner's behavior, whether it is formed through reinforcement. Okay. Reinforcement is giving that instruction in a continuous manner regularly. Like trainers are using methods like reinforcing the last lecture's summary in the first few minutes, and then at the end of the class they revise or they summarize what they have learned in this class. So that's another way of reinforcement of knowledge. Cognitivism is basically new knowledge built upon existing knowledge. So we have already some concepts understood and then we are learning a new thing. So that concept is cognitivism. And finally, we have constructivism, that is, learners construct knowledge through experiencing or experiential learning or self directed learning. There are many other concepts like connectivism and andragogy. Connectivism is used mostly for online learning. Okay, when participants are learning online, so the concept that we use besides behaviorism, cognitivism, and other one, that is connectivism, that is mostly used for online learners. And the concept of andragogy is used for adult learners. So andragogy is nothing but the study of adult learning. Like what we use in classrooms and lower level education is pedagogy. But andragogy talks about higher level education or higher education management, where andragogy, wherein participants come with a lot of previous experience, and already they have work experience in the respective fields. So, which theory to apply? Behaviorism, cognitivism, connectivism, Android. It all depends on the course type, the assessment types, the student learning objectives. So, what is the learning objective of the student? Based on that, the appropriate model or the learning theory can be applied. Now, there are ways of doing things, like reinforcement can be done through instructional units, mapping content onto instructional units like weekly sessions, modules, topics, etc. Include measurable student objectives at the beginning of each class. Create consistent pages so students come and know where information is located. If you're using a LMS or a learning management system, the students get to know where to go to search the respective materials. So one way of making learning effective is guide the student learning through reinforcement. The other one is make learning meaningful and relevant. Now, this is common for all types of learnings or teachings. Okay, whether it's a corporate environment in an organization or a classroom setup or higher education learning, making learning meaningful and relevant makes sense, and this has a very deep impact on the students learning abilities. Okay, so ask meaningful questions, basically with a deeper meaning instead of the minor details, like asking the students what will be the difference or commonalities between two types of learning models. The student has to understand this in detail. So there are many views about this. Andragogy, as we said, helping the adults learn, also emphasizes on making learning relevant, meaningful, and practical. Mostly this applies to the corporate guys or the organizational learners, wherein they have to have the must-know concepts at the beginning and the end of the class. So corporate learners, basically, they are more based on relevancy of the instructional material that is given to them. For adult learners, as we said, give the students opportunities to highlight their prior experiences in the new learning environment, like ask them to answer case studies or give them practical exposure to certain tools and methodologies, which can also include elements in the course design and assessment like self-directed learning. So understanding the participants' previous experience, and based on that, assessments being given will make the student learn a little better. Last stage in this methodology is basically foster self-directed learning. In self-directed learning, the student takes the focus, whereas in a school environment, the teacher teaches and the students learn. So it's a common thing that the teacher is teaching from the teacher's point of view, whereas in an adult learning, the self-directed learning is understanding what the participant's background is and accordingly giving them those instructions. So incorporate the learner's prior knowledge and interest in your learning design. Provide tools for learners to succeed. Promote experiential learning by including reflections. So ask students to reflect on their experiences or past experiences on certain events that are being taught. Create a clear course goals or learning objectives and assessment instructions to guide the students, and be a facilitator and not a sage on stage or I know it all kind of a faculty. So the role of a good faculty is to be a facilitator, to explain exactly how things work rather than just say this is the way it works, and um, not entertain questions from the students. Now, given the basics of instructional design, basically there are plenty of models, at least a few models that we are going to see today. There are many models which are used in a different context. So these models not only help the instructional designers to make sense of the abstract learning theory, but also enable the real world application. So the appropriate model for an appropriate audience based on the predetermined learning objectives will make the learning very, very effective. So an instructional design model can be considered as a framework to develop the learning materials. So when we are talking about uh, a proper training setup, the instructional design model can determine what level of training is needed, which methodology of training will be good or making an impact, and what type of learning material can be used in this setup. So a few instructional design models are named here, like the ADDIE model, and then Kathy Moore's action mapping model, Dick and Carey model, which is a very famous one, Kemp's design, Merrill's first principles of instruction, successive approximation model, the SAM model, and the most recent one is agile or rapid prototyping model, wherein we don't wait for the final outcome. Basically, we start doing things, and as things proceed, we make repetitive um, steps, or we revisit the model and make changes to this particular model as such. Let's look some of them. The ADDIE model has 5 stages. As the name says, it consists of 5 interrelated phases: analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. So this model is frequently used, and it started from 1970s when it was first used in the US military. So the 5 phases are analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. So whenever we talk about learning methodology, so we are talking about analyzing what the students need to know, what are the backgrounds, what are the intelligences that they bring to the table. Then accordingly we'll design a course appropriate to them, like its classroom setup or an online mode will be good, or a field visit will be good. So we will design, and then finally the course contents will be designed and the course materials will be developed, and then the training will happen, that is the actual implementation. And finally we will revisit the entire process by doing an evaluation. So it's an linear model, it's not iterative: analysis, design, development, implementation, and the ADDIE model. So it goes like this sequentially, and it starts with analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation of the course objectives. Skip some of the numbers. The next model is the successive approximation model, wherein this is an iterative model wherein uh, the roadblocks are addressed, like product quality, the meeting the timelines, the budgets, and managing the SMEs, that is the subject matter experts. So it's an agile learning model wherein we are basically developing the instructional design products that address the performance and the need through iterations. So small steps are taken rather than one giant execution step. So it is not linear. This is an iterative process. So it consists of 3 phases: preparation phase, the iterative design phase, and the iterative development phase. So it starts with information gathering, then the savvy start. Savvy start is nothing but brainstorming meeting about who's who, what knowledge they bring, what are the expectations of this training program. Then the entire project is planned by designing the course content, the prototype, and reviewing. And then additional inputs are given based on what is exactly the learning outcome. Then the rollout is done in phases like alpha, beta, and finally the gold. Okay, so the alpha is rolled out first, the changes are made based upon the evaluation of that model, and then the next version is beta, and then finally the gold model, which is the final outcome of the learning model. There's another model called as the backward design model, in which basically the authors say that the educators should plan the learning experiences with the final assessment in mind. And this is a very different type of a model wherein identify the desired results becomes the first stage. The second stage becomes determine the acceptable evidence, what will be needed to prove that the training has happened correctly, and plan the learning experiences and instruction based on what evidence you will take. So first is identify the results that you are expected of the training. determine the acceptable evidence that will be taken, like what type of assessments will be done, and based on those assessments, etc., we will plan the learning experience or the instruction to be given. So this is a backward design model wherein we start with the end in mind. Whenever we talk about education, we cannot be ignoring a very famous or the original taxonomy of educational objectives called Bloom's taxonomy. Benjamin Bloom gave us this model in 1956, wherein the educational objectives, how to set the learning objectives using action verbs, was determined way back almost 70, 75 years back. It has been modified only once in 2001 by Anderson, who happened to be his student. And he made certain changes. So, what changes he made is basically he converted the nouns to verbs. So, earlier the models were called as create, evaluate, analyze, etc. And then now it's called as analyzing, evaluating, creating. So, if you look at this pyramid, starts with it has six stages. It starts with remembering. So every basic education will have some concepts which a student will remember, then he will understand, and then he will apply. So we move higher up from the bottom of the pyramid to the top of the pyramid. And at the top, when the student is about has learned everything and can create a design or create a model of his own, that means the complete learning has happened. So mostly when students give exams, they are in the first two, known as the lower order thinking skills, that is remembering and understanding. Mostly questions are asked like, what are the 5 stages of learning, or which are the 3 models of so and so. So that is remembering and understanding. But when we apply, use that information in a new but similar situation, or when we analyze it or take part apart from the known and identify the relationship between the various stakeholders, that is moving up towards the higher order thinking skills. So the aim of a good educator will be to take the student from lower order thinking skills to the higher order thinking skills. So we were talking about the action verbs to be used, like these 6 stages: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So remembering talks about recalling specific facts. The facts are standard, and if you remember the 3 stages or the 5 steps, so that is remembering. Grasping meaning of materials used, so that is understanding. Applying is use that information in a new situation, so that is a little higher order thinking skill. Analyzing, evaluating, and creating are definitely higher order. So when we are forming our learning objectives, we can use these keywords. So normally we ask students define this or identify this from this list, or match the following, or explain something. So that is the lower order thinking skills. But when we ask students to apply this theorem to real life practical situations, that is higher order thinking skills. We are moving the student from lower order to higher orders, and that's the objective of a good faculty. Like analyze something, or compare two business models, or appraise or critique on this particular business model, or create or design or develop a particular software, or hypothesize. So these are very high level order thinking. So the aim of a good faculty is to move the student from remembering and understanding, which are lower order thinking skills, to higher order thinking skills like evaluating and creating. Another model which comes to our mind is basically the Kolb's 4 stages of learning. According to Kolb, there are 4 stages. One is the concrete experience, reflective observation, abstract conceptualization, and active experimentation. Wherein in the first stage, he feels what he knows about those things. Then he watches how things happen. Then he's thinking how things work, how they are related to each other. And then he starts doing it on their own. So it's a iterative process, or it moves from the first stage, that is concrete experience, to reflective observation, and then to abstract conceptualization, wherein he will learn new concepts and assimilate knowledge. And then finally, active experimentation. Here he's actually participating and doing that himself. So he's directly constructing it, or he's using the learning methodology of constructivism. So this is another chart which explains in detail. So whenever we talk about participants having concrete experience, some background about a particular topic. So we say they have understood the meaning and the value of things. They are analytical in nature. But when we say that he's learning, he's processing that information, and if he's using these two stages, basically assimilator, that is abstract conceptualization and reflective observation. These are observers, so they understand and they learn by observation. Whereas problem solvers are those who have some previous knowledge and have actually done an active implementation or experimentation. So they, in the category of problem solvers comes in accommodators. So these are the four stages where the student will move from one phase to another phase based on what learning is being imparted to him. As I said earlier, there are multiple intelligence in the classroom. Like all students are not equal, all students are unique. They bring certain levels of intelligence to the classroom, and we need to address all of them. We can't be talking only to the higher intellectual people, or we cannot be ignoring the people with different or needing more explanation on simple concepts. So we are talking about these 8 intelligences which are commonly accepted: linguistic, mathematical intelligence, rhythmic, musical rhythmic, or kinesthetic, that is the body movements, spatial intelligence, or naturalist, interpersonal, intrapersonal. These are the commonly used intelligences that have been identified by researchers, and they say that we need to address. So in a classroom we might have people with all of them, individuals. So we might have 8 to 10 people with different types of intelligence. So the instructor's role is basically to address each one uniquely and see, when we address the class, that each one of them has been taken care of accordingly. The next model, which is very interesting, is called as design thinking. It's basically a philosophy or a process of doing problem solving. So this is very heavily used in organizations, and there are courses and there are classes and detailed certifications on design thinking. This is a step of problem solving in alternative strategies, identifying the alternative strategies of finding solutions to complex problems. The complex problems can be called as basically poverty or education or mm, pollution. How do we solve these traffic? These are all complex, wicked problems, as they are known as. So design thinking becomes very, very important because it looks at it from the user's perspective, or the problem, the one who's got the problems. It has these 5 stages: empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So these are the 5 stages of design thinking, and it's an iterative process. So first we empathize with the person who's got a problem, so we understand what is he trying to solve, what nature of problem it is. Then we define the problem by brainstorming. Then we ideate by a lot of new ideas that can solve that problem. We prototype various solutions, and we see which one is the best solution for that problem. So we test those solutions. So we empathize, we define, we ideate, we prototype, and finally we test. So this methodology of design thinking can not only be applied to education, wherein we focus on understanding what the student is supposed to do and what problems is he facing. We can bring design thinking to education, as well as we can use it for various other problems which we intend to solve. No matter which model or which instructional design model we use, there are 3 components which are common to most of these models. And these components is analysis. So every model is analyzing what is the student expected to do. The next is design and develop the course content, and draft the curriculum, lesson plans, etc. And finally, you evaluate. So whichever model we have seen, ID model, SAM model, design thinking, rapid prototyping like through Agile, all these models will do analysis of what is expected to be done in the training program. How do we design and develop the course content? And finally, we need to evaluate to see whether the method has been effective or not. Moving on, how do we use instructional design in the modern workplace. Like the technology is changing, the world is changing. We are living in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Internet is changing, and our speeds, internet speeds are increasing tremendously. So the kind of knowledge and information data that can be processed is humongous. So big data analytics, data sciences, etc. All these are helping learners in learning new things. So e-learning is a concept wherein you can learn online using any of the digital platforms. So it's the delivery of learning and training through any digital method. Okay? It replaces the instructor-led training, and it's mostly cost effective. And that's what researchers said, that e-learning is very cost effective. There are pros and cons. The benefits are accessibility, access anytime at your home place or during travel. Personalization, you can personalize the course content as and when you want it. Flexibility, you can start and stop the course. Trackability, you can track your progress, and you can understand what more you can do with these courses. So lots of benefits there, though there are some cons also. Instructional design trends, where is instructional design moving? Like there are many things happening, like blended learning, hybrid learning, gamification, mobile learning, micro learning is a new concept wherein there are short courses of about 2 to 10 minutes wherein you can take this short course and learn a new concept, like uh, what is data science. I don't have to know the models and the methodology, but I should know what is big data, what is robotics, what is machine learning, those kind of concepts. Small short courses where the content is anything between 2 to 10 minutes. Mobile learning is, you can, we all know it, we can take those regular trainings anywhere, wherever we are using. Gamification is like using gaming in teaching the students, wherein there can be rounds or stages where the student reaches after completing a particular course or a particular module. Then there are simulations, etc. Blended learning is a combination of online learning and independent study. At his own pace, he will complete the course. Where are we moving? What is the career opportunities for instructional designers, or where are the jobs for this, and why is it such an interesting thing? There are thousands of jobs available, whether it's in the corporate world or in the academia. Instructional designers, managers, tech support, technologies, learning architects, these are all fancy names given to instructional designer careers. And a lot of things are happening in this area, and a lot of number of people are required in this area to design proper instructions to be given for different types of education. So it's a growing field, it's a very upcoming field. Instructional design can be used for various tasks. And finally, to end my session, there's a famous quote by Horace Mann: a teacher is one who is attempting to teach without inspiring. A teacher who attempts to teach the students without inspiring the pupil is, with a desire to learn, is hammering on a cold iron. So basically what it means is, we got to inspire, we got to motivate the students with the right tools, right methodology, and then only the effectiveness of the training can be attained. So thank you very much for being with me. I think you just overshoot the timing by 15 minutes. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Over to you, Mr. Pradeep. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for that very complex talk, which you've covered comprehensively
Thank
uh,
you.
on instructional design concepts, which any educator should be conversant with. And there are no questions, so you have been very clear in your concepts. Uh, and so before we leave, uh, I request you all to watch our detox of our disruptive education movement, the disruptive literacy movement by Global Real, which is an initiative by Dr. Sunita Gandhi since 2014. This is to ensure everyone's participation by a people's movement in helping India achieve total foundational literacy and numeracy. As you can see, it's a pretty noble cause where all of us should be involved. And we have several talks on this every day. And for more information on the talks that you would like to listen to, please go to 740-840-1000. So thank you, sir, once again. Good
Thank
evening,
you, sir.
everybody. Goodbye, and see you again tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.